Today, folks, we have got a problem with our cowling on our 150 Yamaha. Punched a hole clean through it, which is something that can happen to anybody. Even though we're working on a Yamaha today, it can apply to other brands of outboard motors. We're going to be using some epoxy and some really cool products from some of our suppliers to help repair this. And we're going to just be jumping right into this. We are not going to be dragging this thing out. Now, what did I want to show you folks is preliminary prep work. There is a little air box. This kind of keeps water off the top of the motor and lets air in. There's a little series of Phillips screws that holds that in. We went ahead and pulled those off of there because we are going to be working quite close to the edge and we're going to be painting on the outside. So we want to just go ahead and get this out of the way. Go ahead and make some room, make some space. And we're going to be using some tools to do some grinding in there, folks. We got, you can see we got fractured glass and stuff is busted all around. And we're going to be using a high caliber epoxy to bond to that, which we talk about polyester and vinyl ester resins a lot on this channel, but epoxy is what we prefer for doing this kind of work. And we've got an assortment of tools. Now, you don't have to have what I have at here in the shop, but if you do have or can get a little angle grinder, and these are called a row lock disc. I don't know that we've showed these a lot on the channel, but you can twist these little discs on and off. You got to buy this little adapter, but it's really good at taking material off. And then we got our Festool. That's a good vacuum assist Festool. We source that from our local BMG distributors or Lewis Marine, maybe. They're kind of affiliated with one another. So if you want to get in touch with those folks about getting one of those. But we're going to get some PPE going before we sand or grind. Good idea to have a mask on anytime you're doing this kind of work. And it's a good idea to have a Tyvek suit and some gloves. Now, the cool thing about the vacuum assist is it's going to catch the majority of the dust. So I want to show you folks at home. We're going to be coming from the inside initially first. So here we go. A lot of times you may have to take off more than you imagine, and we're going to be sanding out over a broad area here because I want to reinforce the area all around it. There's some little fractures and cracks that run out a bit, and that's important. And I've got some techniques. I've done this several times. When you run a charter business like we do, you put your boat in harm's way a lot, and damaging motor cowls is part of it. And I don't know if any of y'all at home have priced them lately, but a cowling for one of these motors is somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000. So we're going to save you a bunch of money showing you how. Raw materials for this, I would imagine $100, $150 to do this job, really top of the line, and it'll be quite nice when we're all done. And if your folks are new to the channel, I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. I'm a second generation professional boat builder and a 100-ton licensed captain. And this motor cowling goes on our 29-footer that we built here in our family's boat shop. So let's jump back into doing a little more sanding here and see how it goes. Here we go, guys. Now, I know you can see some little dust particles in there, but compared to a non-vac assist, again, that's the Festool, that's the RO150 FEQ. But sometimes getting in these little tight, if you look in there, a much tighter space, and that can be challenging, and that's where something like this little angle grinder with the roll-lock disc, I like using a shop vac. This thing is much smaller, and we can really get in there in those little angles and corners and prep it properly. Proper prep is a big deal, folks. you don't prep the surface correctly, your epoxy or your fiberglass is not going to stick. It's the foundation for your repair. All right, here we go. All right, folks, that's you always kind of want to do a little bit of sanding and grinding and inspect your work, but we're basically trying to get a bevel out away from these cracks. We're going to leave some of this material in place. There's no point in grinding everything out. We basically want to take what's really flat, fractured and damaged, and anything that's keeping this material from laying down flush where we can actually get some material on it, that can come out. We want to take just that loose, flaky stuff. Now, one thing I did do prior to that is we did do like a solvent wipe down. This is from Total Boat. There's a dewaxer and a surface prep that's good at cleaning and dewaxing before you sand or grind. You want to clean that area around it, or else your sander is just going to force that oil and residue. And pretty simple matter. Now, sometimes I will put it in a little spray bottle, but most of the time we like to use these blue shop towels. I buy them at Lowe's or Home Depot. Always, again, good idea to wear some gloves if you're going to be doing this. Now, again, I've already did this, but I'm going to do a little more just to kind of demonstrate. The area that we were going to be sanding, I thoroughly wiped it down, because underneath this motor cowling, there's a high likelihood that there is some oil and gas residue, and you don't want that being ground into your repair job. I want to show you what a properly prepped surface should look like. We've kind of gone all around the perimeter. We've feathered this back a bit. We've done a little bit of taping in here, and we've also taken a little bit of time to pre-measure our pieces of fiberglass. We're going with some 1708 biaxial. We got some finishing cloth. We're going to be using a little bit of peel ply as well. And I want to show you what we're going to do with this big gaping hole that we got. Generally, we're just going to use some blue tape, and we're going to span this. We're just going to start right at the top. We're just going to sweep right over this whole surface. Now, if you've been following the channel, you folks have probably seen me use this technique. We got our project boat over here, which we are back to work on. For those of you that have been asking, we are getting back to work. But we use this technique when we were also doing a bunch of work on the console that's tucked over there in the corner for our project boat. And it can work as a good form or a mold to kind of just hold the resin and the cloth that we're putting in place until it firms up. And we're going to do a two-sided repair. We're going to be adding material on the back side, then we're going to be sanding, fairing, and shaping this. And we're going to take it to completion. We're going to try to make this thing look factory, like it was from the factory. Which brings me to thanking everybody that's been tuning in. I know a lot of international viewers out there have been watching, a lot of folks all across the states. We got viewers in Scotland and in the UK and just all over the place. And I got an Estonia, folks in Hawaii. So very, very cool to hear from everybody. I want to thank y'all for tuning in. And if you are finding value in the channel and enjoy what we do and want to see us do more of that, you could take a quick moment, hit that subscribe button, like, share, comment, tell a friend. That really, really does help. Now, y'all will notice what we're doing here is I'm kind of doing a cross hatch. I generally like to do it this way. It keeps any resin potentially. Seems like one pass, sometimes the resin may be able to get through there, but if you do two passes at alternating directions, typically you're going to be just fine keeping that epoxy resin in place. And that is important. We want to manage and control material usage and consumption here. And blue tape, this is your standard Scotch blue tape, hard to beat. We use it all the time in the boat shop. There's a few things. If you got a basic boat repair kit, some blue tape should be part of it, as should some good cutting tools. Typically we use, these are Fiskar Pros. I'll try to put a link for something like that. And if you've never used any of these little zip snips, this is what we use when we're cutting a lot of fiberglass. And we will be sure to put a link below our video's description for all the tools. We got an Amazon store now, so you can see pictures of all this stuff and get it for your own personal use. Okay, so we've got this all taped up. We've got the surface interior wiped down. Now one thing, again, y'all will notice, you can see how cool that looks. See, that's gonna block any resin from coming through or coming out. We took a few minutes to pre-cut. I call this a dry fit. So I've already test fit all this in here. I've placed it, made sure it fits in there just nice and tight, exactly like I want before we get started. Matter of fact, we just did a video talking about 10 steps to fiberglass success, and one of them steps was surface prep, and the other was pre-cutting your materials and supplies and having a plan. Now what I'm doing, I'm throwing a little bit of warmth or heat, a little Wagner. Want to be sure our surface temps are in a good working range. Another little item, a little infrared temperature scanner. Really nice to know what kind of temps we're working with. 76 degrees on the surface, which is about perfect. Again, for you that are following the channel, you know that 70s and 80s are about ideal. Epoxy will work down to about 55 degrees at the minimum, but you got to use a fast activator. And you can work up to about 90, 95 degrees, but the hotter it is, the less time you have to work. So I'm just warming this up. I just want to be sure we flashed any solvents off of there, and we've warmed that up to about 80 degrees just that quick. And again, I'll put a link for this below, folks. You just want to be careful not to overheat the surface. That can happen, and that can be dangerous. So you always just want to be careful with your little Wagner heat source. I'm going to put this way over here, and we have it if we need it. So what we're doing is we are going to be using some of the Total Boat. This is their 2-to-1 high performance epoxy, which I really, really like because it does not produce an amine blush, which is a big deal for guys like me. An amine blush is a surface contaminant that creates a problem, and you have to clean it off between every coat. But if you can get an epoxy that doesn't produce it, you're way better off. It eliminates that step and saves you time and trouble. And what we're going to be doing today is just using a bristle brush to apply our epoxy. You notice we've moved everything right up close. We've got everything we need to work. Got a little metered mixing cup, and we're going to go with just a couple ounces to start with. This epoxy is a 2-to-1, and that's going to mean there's 2 parts epoxy resin to 1 part catalyst. Now it has been fairly cool down here, and a lot of times what will happen is this material will get a little bit thicker when it's cold. You just kind of have to keep that in mind. We're going to go with 2 ounces. Very important to get an accurate mix ratio when working with epoxy, especially. With your vinyl esters and polyesters, you have a little more wiggle room there. And again, we've got videos showing that. So we're right at 2 ounces. I always like to mix or agitate. Be sure things aren't settled down. And let's go with up to 3. That's what we're looking for. There we go. Almost there. We got it. Now epoxy, one reason we're using it in this particular application is it's very, very good at bonding to unique and unusual surfaces. And for one reason or the other, whatever they make these motor cowlings out of, and many times the same thing that jet skis are made out of, you just about have to use an epoxy resin. You want a very, very thorough mix. And the materials we're using are compatible. We talk about a little bit if you're using a product called CSM or chop strand mat. Let's see, I think I got a sample piece of it right over here. We use this a lot in the channel, but generally we don't use it much with epoxy, or at least here in the States, because it doesn't have, epoxy doesn't have the solvents that melt the binders in the CSM. But if y'all hang in through the whole video, I'm going to show you actually how to use the CSM in one of the finishing phases of this project. So I may have to mix more, but we're just going to get started. One of the things people make mistakes is they mix too much epoxy to start with, and we are going to try to be sure that doesn't happen with us. So we are going to just thoroughly mix this. We've already pre-fit and cut this. I know exactly how it's going to fit, but what's a little bit easier to do rather than trying to wet it out inside the console, we are going to wet it out in our paint tray here. Now, one thing about epoxy is it is thicker. It's thicker in nature than your vinyl esters and polyesters, which is one reason that most boats, production boats, are not built out of epoxy, is because it takes a little bit longer to wet out the material. Now, it is super strong. Probably one of the other reasons they don't use it is it's expensive. It's going to cost considerably more, but it is much easier to wet out the backside. Now, one reason we like the 1708 with this, it has the CSM on the backside, but it is stitched or sewn in there. It does not have the same binders that CSM does that you buy just as a standalone CSM. So it works better, and the CSM is better at conforming to irregular shapes, and so you always want to put the CSM side facing down to the material that you're working on. Is kind of the way you want to do it. We're going to go ahead and dab. One reason again we did this in a pan is because if you were trying to dab and push like this, you may push your tape backer, and we don't want to deform our surface there. So it's much better, in my opinion, to do it on the pan. Get the material working in there. There we go. Get plenty going on. I do love to hear about you folks, what your projects are, and recently I asked everybody to comment if you're watching from an unusual location, and had some amazing folks comment. So thank you so much. I got a real kick out of that. That was super cool. And I always love to hear what you guys are working on. So please feel free to drop a comment. Let me know, and I will do my best to respond. Sometimes it's hard for me to do so. You can see we've got good saturation front to back. Now, a lot of times I may, just to be on the safe side, go ahead and put a little bit of resin underneath as well. This material is not nearly as porous as wood would be, or a foam core, and you don't have to worry too terribly much about it drawing the resin out of your fabric. But it's something I kind of preach here on the channel, and I'm going to go ahead and do it on here just so that you folks see the same process over and over again. You can see that I have sanded all the way out around the edges there. One good thing about the 1708 is it holds its shape pretty well. All right, come on in here with me, folks. You can see we're placing it right up in that little corner. I know I got a little bit of an echo going on. It's okay sometimes even too to use your fingers to place this material. 1708 is, said, one of my very favorite materials to work with, and we used it a lot when we were building our 29 footer there in the background. Now you could do a variation of our materials combinations here, but I want to show everybody a little bit of variety, and there's pros and cons to each fabric. It's not like there's just one perfect material for every scenario, and I'm trying to show a little bit of that. You could do multiple layers of the finishing cloth if you wanted to. You could do multiple layers of the 1708, but I didn't want to make a big bulge, heavy glass and have a lot of material kind of sticking out on the front side. So we're going to be fairly conservative here with our application. All right, so we are going to very delicately now place our finishing cloth. Again, we got that nice little notch out. See if I can put it right where I had planned. The idea is for it to slightly overlap just a little bit. Doesn't have to be a whole bunch, but that'll smooth out the surface. That'll smooth out the surface a little bit, make it look a little bit nicer. I'm gonna try to get some of my resin out of my cup. We were pretty close on the guesstimate. The finishing cloth doesn't take a lot of material to wet out. If you folks have been watching some of our recent episodes, we did a video showing exactly how much material it takes to wet out 1 square foot of the 1708 and the finishing cloth, the CSM, different materials. That'll help you folks at home kind of guesstimate how much materials you need on your next project. I made me just a little more material there. So we're going to put our peel ply on, but you can see that that finishing cloth has a smoother overall texture, and it's quite strong, but it doesn't build much thickness at all. So you've really got to put a lot of layers of that to get any real thickness. All right, and again, we're going with a little more. We might mix just a tiny bit more of the, you know what, I think we're right on. I think it'll work. We hate to waste material. We'll see how it goes. I can always mix up a little bit more if needed. And, we'll place our peel ply the same way, just very gently. Peel ply is really cool stuff. It'll leave a nice textured finish on the surface. And if you are working with an epoxy that produces an amine blush, the peel ply will help alleviate that for you. It'll help smooth things out. We'll get a beautiful finish on this with the peel ply. Try to work those wrinkles out. It's not the end of the world if you get one, but this is kind of a complex shape here, so it may take a little bit of finessing. Sometimes you can, it's like a wrinkle in your bed sheet. Sometimes you can work it out of there and kind of move it around. Really neat material there. Didn't grow up working with peel ply. We worked with a lot of materials. My father was a boat builder, but it was more old school. It was kind of the matte and the CSM and the Roven were kind of the two main materials. And then the 1708 and 1808. The last few years we built our 29 footer, and the 1708 and the CSM are probably the two materials that if I were to recommend someone that's getting started in fiberglass work, if you're working with a kayak or a canoe, the little lightweight finishing cloth is very nice. Oh yeah, that's looking primo. I was spot on with my guesstimate there. Now we're gonna get our little, one of my little favorite tools of the trade, our little bubble buster. We keep about a gallon of acetone in a 5-gallon bucket, and I got a little bit of acetone in my Zep sprayer there. Sometimes it's nice just to get a little. Now they offer them in different sizes. For bigger panels, a 6-inch one, but for little stuff like this, the little 2 or 3 is the way to go. All right, we want to be sure there's no solvent in there, and we're gonna go over this a little bit. That'll kind of help work the peel ply in and potentially work any air out of the material underneath. Now they do make ones with a slight curve to them, and this is a complex shape here, so I got to be careful. I want to work the air out, but I don't want to put a bunch of ridges and wrinkles, bruise the fabric. That is looking just about perfect. And you folks be sure to hang in. Be sure to hang in till the end too. Every step is important in this kind of process. If you skip one of these steps, you're probably going to have an issue at some point. You may not want, you may wonder what happened, and it can be a subtle thing, it can be a small thing, but every step in this process is important. So we used our little heat source and brought the temperatures up a little bit on the surface, and it has actually firmed up. You can hear it there now. It's been about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and the material in the pan, I didn't heat it up, and I'll show you. It is still, you can see that is still quite tacky. So that is one of those little tricks you can kind of put in your little arsenal there is you just got to be careful not to throw too much heat at it. That's why you need the temperature probe and the heat source working together. But that'll definitely move things along, because this should allow us to go ahead and pull our tape. We can kind of see what we got going on, under there, and then what we can do is get ready to do some sanding and apply more material. This is a two-sided repair. Now sometimes you can only do repairs from one side, and I'm sure at some point in the channel we will do a video like that. Now again, if you're new to the channel, folks, and you want to learn more about fiberglass and composites, we have about 150 videos on the channel, and well over 100 of them are dealing with fiberglass, Gelcoat, composites, boat building. We documented the build of our 29-footer in the background. And for those of you that have been asking, yes, we are getting back to work on our project boat. Folks, just life is busy. We have a charter business, I have a family, and sometimes it's hard to juggle all of these projects. There you go, just like that. And the tape held everything kind of in place. We didn't have any drips or runs. And that feels pretty good already. Now we've got a lot of body lines, and there's a lot going on in here, but we're going to take some of this fractured material off, and we're going to start back up with our fest tool, our vacuum assist. Now if you don't have one of those, you again can hold a shop vac close by. I like the big ones from DeWalt there, the Rigid brand, and that will catch a lot of the dust as well. Another thing that we do a lot of times in the shop is we'll just have a fan moving a little air away from you. You do not want to be breathing this dust, although our fest tool is going to catch the vast majority of it. Y'all be sure to check fest tool out. Now the biaxial is going to give you quite a bit of strength, but we want a more random surface material on the surface here. It's going to be more random. We're probably going to use some CSM so we get better cosmetics there, but I want to do a little bit of shaping and sculpting, show everybody what it needs to look like. All right, here we go, folks. All right, so that is shaping up nicely. The idea is to kind of chase out some of these cracks, and we're gonna come back with a fiber-rated filler. We got a little bit more sanding to do here. Check out how nice everything turned out after we used our fest tool that we got from our friends there at Lewis Supply to kind of feather everything out. Now, one thing I did do, sometimes I will like to come back with like some 40 grit on our little Velcro 3M pad, and I did a little bit of blocking and shaping and kind of blending and feathering a little bit. And we vacuumed the dust off. A lot of times I will come over with a little bit of compressed air, and always a good idea to come back again with a little bit of a surface prep and de-waxer. It's from our friends there at Total Boat. If you want to go there and check them out, it's totalboat.com/fishbump, and there's a link below our video's description. There's should make it a little bit easier for y'all to find exactly what we're using. Again, we are using the 2-to-1 high performance blush free epoxy and their surface prep. It's hard to rush this kind of stuff, folks. I know our videos tend to run a little bit on the long side, but if you want to do it right, it's going to take a certain number of steps. You can see that. Flashing that off of there, and then we will come back with our little Wagner heat source. What did I do with it? There it is. And warm that up one more time. Timing is important, everybody. Like you'll notice, it's getting dark outside, but I want to get some material on before we call it a day. That way it can cure overnight, and then we are ready to go again in the morning. Always a good idea to do a little bit of taping and bordering as well. I just want to put a little bit around the edges so we don't drop out there. We're going to be pretty focused on this next pass. After we get some more filler in there, we're going to be going back with the Total Fair, shaping this up, and then we got some Yamaha factory paint and clear coat. So we are doing this like back in the day. I used to do a lot of insurance repair work, and it had to be right. Folks, when folks brought their boat in and they had insurance on it and it was damaged, they wanted absolutely right. And that's how we learned a lot of this. That and from my dad, who was a professional boat builder and repairman, and he built this shop, and I grew up in it, and got to thank him. I'm happy to share what he taught with me with everybody. It's been just awesome to hear the response from everyone, the appreciation. So many nice folks out there that are working on their boats, and we appreciate hearing from everybody. Okay, so we got a little bit of a border. I went ahead and drew up a little bit of the 2-to-1 performance epoxy. We've got our 2 parts already poured up. We're going to go back with the fast, and then we're going to be mixing some of these additives in here, folks, and making something custom. So we're at 2, and we want to go to 3. So that would be if we were at 50 milliliters, and then we went to 75 milliliters. Would be the correct ratio. 2-to-1. Good thorough mix, and we're going to put in our additives here in a moment. It's important to remember, again, the hotter it is, you need to change your hardeners. We're going pretty fast today because it is fairly cool here in this part of the country, and we're trying to move right along. Now, a very popular additive is a silica thickener, or a colloidal silica is a really good way to make up your own putties and fillers. We're going to take a few scoops of that. We got some other additives as well. We got some milled fibers, and I'm going to show y'all another little trick I like to use. I got to chop up some of the CSM. Typically we don't use CSM very much with epoxy, but if you cut it up like we've got there, you can make that work for you. Just got to be careful when you add these additives and fillers in there. A lot of times your epoxy will start to go off on you, especially when you're mixing in these little cups. So you kind of have to work with some enthusiasm. I went ahead and chopped up a little bit of our CSM that you can see there on the side. And that's thickening up considerably already. A lot of times we will try to use gravity. If we can, we will probably lay this over on its side so that gravity is working with us on this application. Now, I'm not wearing a dust mask right now, but I really should be, and you should be at home if you're working with this stuff. We've got airflow through the shop. You want to be careful though. I've got some of the fibers from our CSM that's going to give us a little more strength than just your short strand milled fibers. And all I was doing with that is I'm just taking our scissors and we're just cutting fibers, say from 1/4 inch long to 1/2 inch long. Don't want them super long, but that will add considerable strength, much stronger than just a putty alone. If Fibers are where the strength is, or the glass fibers. The resin kind of binds it. Resin kind of binds it all together. Together, there's strength. Too much of one or too little of the other, and you're compromised. You can see that's kind of turning into a fibrous putty. Like that a little bit thicker. A lot of times you just kind of have to go trial and error. Mix a little of one. This will kind of thicken it. The milled fibers are a little more for the strength. And then we're going to be switching to the total fair, which is equal. It's a two-part A and B. That'll be for fairing and smoothing. I'm going to do this job right. I said, folks, there's a lot of folks on YouTube, and I've seen a bunch of videos that are not professional grade. Some are okay. You see all kind of stuff. But this is something our family has done professionally for generations. So hopefully you guys and gals out there that are watching can get a professional result. We're showing you the right and correct way to do this, or at least ways we've done it in the past and had success. I want to say thank you as well to all of our Patreon members out there. You know who you are. How about I do a shout out to Jim in Scotland. Jim, you have been a loyal supporter of the channel, and we thank you so much. And I'm excited for you to get your boat operational. I know you've been working hard on it, and you've been very kind to the channel, and we just appreciate everybody out there that's a member or a Patreon. And if you need to get in touch with me directly for a project you're working on, Patreon would be the way to do it. That way we can offer one-on-one consultation and help you folks. We got a number of people all over the world right now that we're working with, and it's very, very exciting. Okay, that is looking about right. Now we need to move right along, because once you've activated this material, give or take, I mean, it's going to go relatively quickly. Now, turning this where we've got gravity in our favor versus it falling or sliding down the side, it is nice to have gravity working with you. And I need a nice little spreader blade to work with. Now this is a real big one, but a lot of times what we will do is just take a razor knife and you can cut it down to size. You just want to be careful, folks. I've done this a bunch, but a razor knife will really hurt you. So be careful. I'm pretty happy with that mix. Sometimes the silica will get a little bit lumpy and bumpy, but the longer fibers are going to really add some strength to that. And it'll give a nice uniform finish. We won't have that geometric pattern like you would with the 1708 or a cloth. I probably mixed up a good bit more material than I actually needed. That's okay. I got another little project we're working on off to the side. I may use some for that. Sometimes you'll see those little clumps and bumps of the silica, and it is okay to break them with your little blade. This isn't going to be super slick or super smooth in this pass. We're just trying to get some more structural strength back in there. And this is pretty similar to like how they actually make these cowlings. It's a fiber-rated material. It's a lot like CSM. May not even use my spreader blade. But you want a random fiber, because when we paint this, the paint is going to be slick and smooth, and it's amazing, but you'll get this phenomenon called print through, and you will be able to see the pattern of the fiberglass material you use to repair it, and it's not good. You do not want to see that in your finished coat. Now again, there are other ways to do this. Some people will go right over the outside with some of their fairing fillers and putties, but I want to add as much strength back to this as possible, maybe even make it stronger than it was originally. Yep. This is not going to flow quite like a putty. It's going to drag a little bit because of the fibers, but that's what makes it strong. And there's a little bit of a gap down in there as well. We are not going to rush this at all. We're going to give this all night long to cure and get a really good bond. Timing is a big thing with doing this kind of work, folks. If you can time this work so that it can cure overnight, and when you start fresh in the morning, you got something you can go right to work with. Definitely advantageous. And a light touch. Sometimes just have to move it a little bit here and move it a little bit there. A little bit more there. I like to add just kind of a little bit at a time, and we can always sand it down. It's probably better to overfill it, put a little more material in than you think you need. You can always sand it back, sand it down. If you underfill it, that means you're going to have to fill it again tomorrow, and that's going to be one more curing cycle that you're going to have to go through. You don't want that. Sometimes you can even kind of chop it a little bit to level it, get it to cut that across there, burst any of those little bubbles that are possibly down in, and level everything up a little bit. Pretty good. Always goes in phases, folks. Rarely can you get this all in one pass and all with one material. I'm gonna put a little bit more right there where that heaviest was. And again, the Festool makes quick work of that. I would rather this be a little overbuilt and sand it and shape it versus underfilled and having to come back and fill it again tomorrow. So we got a little bit of our pill ply, just like what we used on the inside. I always like to make my pill ply a little bit larger than the actual area that we're working on. That way you have something to grab and peel it loose. If you're not careful, if you just make it too small, it can be really, really hard to separate from your material. Now I'm going to use our little roller here, and I can contour that material even a little more. Kind of contour and shape it, work out any air bubbles potentially. We were shooting for a first class repair, folks. This is not backyard driveway type stuff. This is professional caliber. This is the kind of work you want. If you took your boat in and had it done, and it's hard to find quality craftsmen these days that'll do this kind of work. But I'm finding a lot of folks, y'all are totally capable of doing this at home. Many of you guys that have construction backgrounds or doing drywall or auto body, that kind of stuff, and a few basic tools and just kind of a basic fill. I don't know if y'all can tell, but you can see that pill ply over that material really helped contour, and it's just a very light touch what I'm doing there. I'm going to work it all the way out to the edge there, and that is going to save us some work and trouble in the morning for sure. It'll shorten our path to getting that fair. I like that. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but that is really, really, really nice. So we let this cure overnight, and it feels nice and cured, and our pill ply has done its job. Really helped to contour and smooth that and blend everything. That feels really, really nice. And then we did the underside as well. I know you folks probably want to see that. I don't know why it's so satisfying to see pill ply come loose. Now sometimes when it terminates on the edge, it'll pull some fibers, and what you're seeing there, folks, I will use a little magic marker sometimes to mark out my fabric, and so that's why it has those little dark spots. But yes, that is beautiful. And that finishing cloth kind of helped that make a transition. Use the strength of the 1708 and then the finishing capabilities of the cloth. And then we used our combination of the colloidal silica and the chopped fibers. Now we've got a little bit of an edge there, folks, and we're going to be using, again, the Festool RO150 FEQ. If you're going to be doing any amount of serious grinding, if you got a major project, this is money well spent. Now we source this from our local supplier, Lewis Marine or BMG. A lot of the local folks source stuff from those folks, and they're really good people to deal with. And of course you can get them online, I would imagine, but we're going to go to doing some sanding and getting this faired and shaped in. We got a combination of using the big sander, and we're going to use some blocks. So good idea, always Tyvek suit respirator, even though we have a vacuum assist with this particular machine. And we got some 60 grit, we got some 60 grit and some 50 grit that we're working with. So here we go. Here we go, folks. We're going to start blending those upper edges. Oh yeah, that's looking really nice. Now y'all notice, like this Festool, the vacuum comes on before we start to sand, and it continues to run for a few minutes, and it picks up the vast majority of the dust, which makes this kind of stuff just so much more enjoyable. That's probably one of the biggest negatives of doing fiberglass work, or sanding, the sanding and the grinding and the vac assist tool. But what we're doing here, folks, we've got multiple curves and body lines and creases. Like you can see, there's a body line kind of across there, and we got one kind of coming in here. So this is a fairly complex piece or part, and a lot of times what I'll do is the bulk of the sanding with something with some power, and then we may come back with our little 3M blocks and either some 60 grit or that is some 80 grit, and do some detail sanding where you're just kind of trying to pick up these curves and contours as natural as possible. And we're going to spend a little time doing that. If you've never done body work, the main thing to remember is just take your time, and you're looking to follow the natural contours of whatever it is you're working on, and you're going to get more precision with each pass. So when you put the rough fiberglass in, you kind of get it pretty close, but you want it a little bit lower than the maximum fill that you're going to do, because we're going to be coming back with some of the Total Fair, which is a 1-to-1 epoxy fairing compound. And again, you folks, any of this stuff that we're using from Total Boat, you can go to totalboat.com/fishbump, and there's a link below our video's description for all of this stuff if you're doing your own outboard motor repair. All right, folks, more shaping and sculpting. We got a little contour right here, and fortunately we have another body line. Like, I'm kind of looking at this, and we're trying to get an idea of how all these contours are coming together. You can use your fingers and your hands too. You can feel more than you can see sometimes. So when I'm running my hand over here, you can, like along this, you can feel little bumps and lumps going up and down, side to side, and sometimes that's what we will do, is we will alternate. You may sand inline for a moment, and then sometimes we will sand diagonally this way, and then we may sand diagonally that way, and you're giving this a bit of what I call like a crosshatch pattern, and that'll help you get a more true or a fairer surface is what we're trying to do. So sometimes you just can't always go in one direction, and then use your hands to feel and shape. Like, I can feel this ridge right there, and this over here doesn't really have that ridge. So I need to kind of soften that corner down right in there. And this is something you develop with experience, folks. And remember, don't let this paralyze you. If you sand a little bit too much, you can always come back with the next phase of filler and build it back up. Come on down, folks, take a look at what a properly faired and shaped surface should look like. You can see we really blended those edges super nice. I'm gonna move across that with my hand. I don't feel any lumps or ridges. We've kind of contoured or scalloped that out a bit. Now you'll notice there were a few little bubbles there, and that's okay. That's pretty typical. It's pretty common when you're using a material like we were, like the thickened epoxy. But one thing I did do is come back with a razor blade and actually kind of scratched out the inside to be sure that when we put our filler on there, you've got some surface, some bite on it. And one thing we're gonna do to save time, now I went ahead and taped this off, and I used some of the Total Boat Dewaxer once again to wipe that surface. But I wanted to show you folks, sometimes it can be tricky pouring this out of a jug. Now sometimes I'll put like my acetone in a spray bottle like this, so that if we're wiping something down with acetone, you can just spray it in there. That's my acetone, my cleaning bucket, by the way. But you can also use these little metered or graduated dispensing cups. You can see as you squeeze them, the material comes out. And that's a little easier to control versus trying to pour it out of the gallon jug. And usually what I like to do, even though I've already done this, I like to wipe it from edge to edge. And a lot of times what I will do is turn the cloth or open the cloth and split it and wipe it 2 or 3 times from a different surface on your clean cloth there. Now you'll notice I also did my taping right out to the very edge where there's just a little halo of the original paint showing, and that is completely acceptable and kind of the way I prefer to do it. Now some of you folks out there may have some different options. Now sometimes on a day like today, I also may throw a little bit of heat with the heat gun from a distance and let that kind of flash off. I'm gonna warm up that surface a bit because it's fairly cool for us today. It's 64 degrees, which is right in the range of our materials, but I'm gonna try to hurry this along. And the total fair, you can see right here, our application temp is from 50 to 100 degrees. But we're gonna try to bring up those surface temps just a little. Remember that the warmer your surface is, the faster your material is gonna cure. Okay, so we can move that out of the way, that out of the way. And y'all will notice I've actually moved my table around where we can get to everything and work. That is gonna be your part A, your resin. We got 2 distinctly different colors. We got kind of a blue and a, I guess I would call that a yellow or almost an orange. And there is gonna be a layer on top that you can kind of peel back. That'll keep the surface of this material from thickening up. I like to leave it on there as long as I can. Today, we're not mixing up a real huge batch. I'm gonna agitate that just a little bit, kind of go down underneath the surface. This is a 1-to-1, and I'm probably gonna overfill this a bit there, folks. Like we talked about earlier, I usually like to add plenty of material and not have to worry about coming back and filling it again. So my hope is today we can apply our filler and then we can be done with it. Y'all notice I turned that over a little bit. Now it's totally normal for there to be a little discoloration, or sometimes they call that like oxidation. I'm going to try to get that as close to equal as possible. I would say that is pretty darn close. You'll notice the yellow, the part A, is a little more, got a little more of a liquid texture to it. The blue, the part B, is going to be a little bit stiffer consistency. We really want to cut that in. It's going to make a green. And a lot of times you can even warm this stuff up a little bit and it'll help. Sometimes I will throw a little bit of heat. Now in the summertime, you got to be careful. You're not going to have to do this at all in the summertime when the temps are high. The resin or the putties are going to be a little thinner and easier to spread out. But in the wintertime, it is okay to add a little heat. Something else I wanted to mention, folks, is you do not want to use a porous surface for your mixing surface. I see people sometimes using cardboard. This is actually some signboard material that is nice and non-porous. You do not want to use a porous material for this kind of work. I hope you guys and gals out there again are enjoying what we're doing, and if you are, please remember to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like, share, comment, and tell a friend. The more we grow, the more of these kind of videos we can do for everybody. And I also want to thank everybody, especially our Patreons out there. You guys are fantastic. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. Okay, so that actually even limbered it up a little bit by just warming it. I'm going to warm it just a touch more. And again, I probably went a little bit generous there, but I want to have plenty. Want to build it up a little on the thick side. You can see that all of our solvent has flashed off. Looks really nice. I know it's not very exciting, the mixing and the stirring, but it is very important. Now I also like to be sure there's none on the edge of the blade. I always like to scrape that off. Sometimes you'll have some residue right on the edges, and that is not good. You want a nice, uniform, homogeneous mix. All right, now at first we're just gonna put a fairly thin, I wanna really wipe everything really tight into any of those potential pinholes. You can see right there, we're working that material in multiple directions. That is another thing I see folks new to this kind of work do. They'll maybe wipe it just one way, and they'll say, like for example, they may wipe from top to the bottom and say, well, I got it, and that's plenty good right there. But sometimes when this thing is exposed to heat in the summertime, it'll cause it to bubble or show a blemish wherever that little hole is, and that is not a good thing. So you can see we're gonna wipe down, we're gonna wipe across, I'm gonna wipe it really tight, we're gonna wipe back the other way. I think you folks kind of get the idea, just multiple passes. And we're gonna go all the way from tape to tape, just totally fine. Just take your time with this stuff. If you see there's a little lump of some kind of material right there, sometimes you may have a little, it's okay to take the corner of your blade and dig that out of there. Very therapeutic. Get this stuff on there, kind of relaxing. That's another thing about this kind of work, is don't expect to get everything level and perfect on the first pass of material. We're going to do this epoxy fairing filler, and then we are going to be spraying a primer on here, and the primer will fill up some of the pinholes that may be in this material. And again, that's just part of doing this kind of work. All right, I like that pretty good. Now what I want to do is we'll warm this up, and we'll kind of babysit this a little bit. Normally you need about 3 to 12 hours. Obviously the warmer it is, the shorter that cure time, but I think that looks pretty good. Now remember, it's okay to have like a little ridge or something like this. This stuff sands beautifully, and that's not a problem. Now what I've been doing is using my Wagner and my little temperature gun, one in one hand, one in the other, and we got like over here, we're holding it, say 64 degrees, but I've been steadily running our little heat gun, and you can see how I'm holding right at 99, which it's amazing with a little technique and a little practice with this, how you can take a cold day that would normally take materials a very long time to cure, but you gotta keep moving, and literally like every 15-20 seconds I'm coming back in here and I'm checking to be sure I don't overheat this surface. But it's amazing how much time you can save, and that's like one of those little boat repairman hacks. It'll save you folks a bunch of time. We left that cure overnight, so it's been about 12 hours or so, and we've already started doing a little bit of blocking and shaping and sanding. And what I've got today, we've made some custom blocks. This one's got a little contour in it that's really nice for kind of scalloping out that little area. I made that out of some Airex foam, and for you DIYers at home, I've got an assortment of little blocks that I've made over the years. Foam blocks, wood blocks, some different core materials. And you can get an assortment of shapes and contours. Like this one in here, you can kind of use it just to roll or sculpt a little bit. And then we've got our little 3M block that we're going to be using. We're using some 120 grit to start. I'm not going terribly aggressive. Now I could use the Festool a little bit. If you have one of these, I'm going to run it just a bit with some 180 grit. That's the 180, and we're just going to kind of knock the surface off the main areas. All right, the Festool really did quick work of that. And I would say it's like 95% dust free, which is amazing. It really helps, because on a day like today, it's pretty cold for us outside and we got the doors shut and we don't really have any air flowing. So want to be sure to wear a mask or a respirator when you're doing this. And I'm going to move ahead with a block now that we've kind of got most of the contouring. Sometimes with power tools, you can move stuff along rapidly, but you've got so many shapes here. We need a little bit of finesse, and it's hard to beat just a block. Now, again, you don't have to have the 3M blocks. You can make a little wooden block and just wrap your paper around it. And again, all the stuff we're using on the channel, folks, you can look for a link below our video's description, and we got an Amazon store. You can purchase everything we're showing. So I'm going to put the respirator back on. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And what we're going to be doing is just make a nice, long, steady stroke. Sometimes we will do a little bit diagonal one way. Do some diagonal the other way. Just take your time. And a little bit everywhere. You don't want to really sand any one area 100%. So I'm going to kind of stop right there. And then we're going to move up this upper section. Then I'm going to change directions. We're just looking for the highest places. We want to contour them down. I can actually feel a little bit of a ridge right in here. So I'm going to focus on that. It's amazing what your hands can feel that your eyes can't see. I'm going to contour that ridge, a little more shaping. You just want to work everywhere. You don't want to focus. You can see we're still a little low right in there, but that is okay. Sometimes we'll even do a bit of an orbital. But generally when you're fairing, you want long, straight strokes. And you can see how the tape is helping us keep where we need to be. We're looking for this to kind of just go almost transparent. You'll almost get to where you can see through the total fair. Yeah, you can see the tape starting to show through. And what's nice, again, with the total fair, you can look at the pad there, and
we don't have any clogging, and that's only 120 grit, and it's doing a beautiful job. Doing a beautiful job so far. So we've kind of mostly transparent around the tape line. We're still a little heavy back here and up here, so we're going to focus just a bit. Whew, things have come so far since I was a boy growing up in this boat shop. We pretty much had Bondo, or you had to take like epoxy and add some Cabasil and make like a putty or filler, and you didn't have all these really nice epoxy products that we have these days. So I'm going to continue to sand a little more. You can still see we're a little low right in there, but we've got some material we can still take off to kind of get where we need to be. I know there's a lot of steps here, folks. I know it's time consuming. There's a lot of little videos on YouTube that are 10 or 15 minutes long, and they give you brief little overviews. But if you're actually wanting to do the repair, the longer videos like we're doing, these are full tutorial grade videos that are going to get you to the end and get it done right. Really not a lot of shortcuts with this kind of stuff. It's important to follow all the steps. Warming that up does help, especially when it's a little bit on the cool side. Again, we're gonna go and border outside of this just a bit to be sure we don't get in areas that we don't want to deal with. And a lot of times it's kind of funny how this stuff, these repaired areas may start off in a relatively small area, but by the time you've worked your way out and feathered it and blended it, I'm going to try to use some of these body lines here and not go beyond them. Sometimes you can use the contours of the cowling and the shape and like body lines to fade your paint and your primer out so that it looks nicer. I want to really appreciate everybody for hanging in there with our videos. Appreciate our viewers so much. All right, that's probably going to be fine for. And what we're going to start with now would be, we're going to kind of move on to some 400. Sometimes you need to jump back and forth between 220, 320, or 400. Like it's a little bit thick right in there, and I'm going to kind of run a little bit of the 220, knock that edge down just a little bit. You'd be surprised at how well even 400 can cut though. That'll minimize scratches in the subsurface. You want to use it as aggressive as you can get away with, but you don't want to put in scratches that are so deep that your primer has trouble covering it or hiding it. Yeah, you can see we're it's starting to blend, where instead of having that crisp line is starting to fade or blend a little bit. That's what you want. We've decided to add a little more filler. Now I wanted to show you guys where we are. We got a nice crisp body line right through there. But when I ran my hand over this, I can just feel, and it needs a little more filling. And sometimes that happens. It's always nice if you can get it in one pass, but sometimes it requires two. One trick you can do in the summertime is to spread it out on your board. Instead of leaving it in a big clump, you spread it out so it dissipates the heat. You can also, in the wintertime, if we want to warm it up a little bit, you can spread it out, throw a little heat over. Want to move things along, shorten that cure time a little bit. Like I said, we have already wiped this down with some of the Total Boat de-waxer, taped our perimeter, we've blown it off. But you can see we got a couple little pinholes and whatnot around the edges, and there's just a little bit of, I can feel just a little bit of movement when I run my hand across that surface, and I want this to be absolutely right. And I know you do too if you're going to do this kind of work on your motor cowling, or if you're in a shop doing it for somebody else, they're gonna want it 100% right. Sometimes when you have like the original motor surface and you have some of our fiberglass and epoxy filler, and then you got the total boat products there, they can be slightly different hardnesses, and sometimes when you're sanding you'll get these little irregularities. So again, that's why it's really nice to kind of do a nice long pass where we're sanding uniformly, same kind of material, front to back. Cover the edges. My dad was always a big one on doing it right, even if you need to add another coat or sand it off. Whatever it takes to get a quality repair. Perfection is tricky, but getting it done right is completely doable. It doesn't have to be perfect necessarily. Perfection is tough. Make yourself a little bit crazy shooting for perfection sometimes. So we've given our total fair overnight to cure, and it feels really good, looks really good. Time to get to doing some shaping and sanding again. And like I said, folks, don't be discouraged if you have to fill more than once. Now we're going back with some 120 on our little 3M block. Get my glasses on so I can see. We're going to try to just really focus on the filler itself. You can see we're getting a nice, really nice gradual transition there, whereas over here you can see it's still quite thick. So we're going to get off of that. Focus more over this way. Alright, now one thing we can do as well is jump back in here before we go too terribly far. I'm going to do a little bit of shaping and contouring. I'm going to use this little piece of Airex foam that I radius, but you could do that with some plywood as well, or if you have some foam. Just a little bit at a time. Delicate light touches in order for this kind of stuff. I wanted to show y'all one more little trick. If you'll notice, there's kind of a body line there and a body line here. And what I've done is I've laid some blue tape up to where we have a body line and then where it transitions. And that'll kind of help you to establish this crease. It can be very difficult to get this accurate if you don't have something. And sometimes we will use straight edges. Sometimes we will use pieces of tape, maybe. I'm sure y'all would like to see, you can kind of see that. That's nice and crisp. You want these lines to blend perfectly, and a lot of times the tape will help you, and you'll even see me, a lot of times we'll walk around and you're looking and siding. That is the kind of stuff you will see when you're doing body work and shaping and fairing, and it's very hard to do it just freehand without some kind of guide. Now I'm using a little piece of a foam rubber pad here. It's actually, these are out of a gymnasium or like a dance hall. Somebody had these down as like the tumbling mats, and it makes a really good station to work on when you're doing work like with motor cowlings and stuff. And I'm using this foam block and just very gently transitioning these edges and kind of feathering. This is where you'll usually get a lump or a bump, is right when you're going from one material to another, and then using your hands along with your eyes and to feel for any irregularities or misshapen material. But this feels a lot better. And like I said yesterday, with one fill, there's a lot of folks, if it was kind of more of a commercial application and you're just trying to get it sealed up, be totally fine. That is looking about right. Now that's taking a minute there, folks. Again, it's a complicated part, but I'm pretty pleased with that. We got some nice sculpting right in here. We're following this shape, and we've kind of looked at the other side and looked at how far back this little crease goes and make sure we're getting very similar dimensions. So I know this is running on, it's kind of lengthy, but this is what it takes to do it correct. So you folks at home, one more little trick when it comes to masking and taping. Now we have finished all of our fairing. We have blown it off and vacuumed and wiped it down with some solvent wipe. We put one layer of tape down, and you'll notice we're putting a second layer just inside of it, a little bit wider tape. And what we're doing is we are rolling it and we're putting it just inside of our original tape line. And what that'll do is it'll give us something to mask off of, and this radiused edge will also reduce your paint or your overspray, leaving a really crisp line, which is not what you want. You kind of want it feathered. Now what I did do, I went ahead and took a piece of your 3M, that's some 40-inch wide, 48-inch wide hand masking tape, and went ahead and opened it up. Sometimes it's nice to have a second person doing this. And you can just walk right up just like so. And that is going to stick lightly to the tape. And then you can come back with your razor blade, just very gently kind of score that. Not cutting through the tape, we're just putting the lightest of scores on that. You see how neat that is. Just be careful. Obviously, anytime you're working with a razor blade, same deal. I don't know if y'all can see over here. I'm just very lightly running that blade, just touching the plastic is all you have to do. Just like that. That's a little painter's. It's another thing, you DIYers at home, just go ahead and buy you a box of razor blades or utility blades. Now I am using today, it's some Mercury Quicksilver. It's a primer. There's other brands. Color Right makes it. These are very common in like most of your dealerships and whatnot. And it's a really, really good idea to always prime and thoroughly mix your primer. Now, temperature is important. We've warmed the shop up a little bit. It started out really cold this morning. And you can even warm up these cans. You got to be careful doing it, but sometimes we will take our little heat gun. There it is. There it is. Oy! And warm up the can just a little bit as you shake it. That's going to help the material flow out of there a little better. And it's going to loosen up that paint sometimes if it's stuck a bit. But I have already done that. That should be good to go. Get a little protection anyway. Probably not a bad idea to use a legit respirator, and I usually like to kind of test fire a little bit. Be sure we're getting some good material. And the first pass doesn't need to be super heavy. I am going to warm up this surface just a little bit as well. Surface temps are important. We're not trying to go very far off of the prime surface, or the repaired surface rather. We're going to start our first couple passes right. Here we go, folks. Remember to let off the trigger at the end of each pass. You don't want to go terribly heavy on that. A lot of people go overboard. That is probably enough on the first pass. We're going to give that 10 or 15 minutes and we're going to build it as needed. Here we go, folks. Coat number 2. Typically 15 or 20 minutes or so between coats. Going to clear the nozzle, start at the top. Going to go a little heavier this time. You always want to lift at the end of each stroke there, folks, whether it's with an aerosol or if you're spraying Gelcoat with something like the Gelcoater. You want to lift at the end. It's always a light touch. And more small coats, typically better than just a couple big coats. Again, big fan of using on a cold day. You can throw just a little bit of heat out there. Another 15 or 20 minutes, go for coat number 3. Coat number 3, here we go. Clear the nozzle, start from the top. A little heavier this time. Sometimes we'll make passes from multiple directions there as well and just kind of fill it in nice and easy. We got a few little pinholes we're working on. A lot of times those will fill as you add material. Don't be tempted to just fog that material in there. Okay, probably coats 4 and 5 coming up. Coat number 4. Here we go, a little bit heavier, start at the top. Taking it out just a touch further each time. Now sometimes I will alternate the direction as well. Help get a nice even coat. All right, that is looking pretty good there, folks. So we are probably going to be wrapping up because this episode is going quite long. We've got the structural repair part of this done. I believe there will be a part 2 where we actually add, we've got a factory match color coat, we've got a clear coat. Now remember, Total Boat products, what we used exclusively, the high performance resin, the Total Fair, the de-waxer. There is a totalboat.com/fishbump link for you folks that want to purchase some of these products. Just be sure when you go to Total Boat to use that fish bump link. And we have descriptions below all of our videos for all the tools, equipment, supplies, and miscellaneous that we do use. And that does help support the channel, as does going ahead and hitting that subscribe button. Like, share, comment, tell a friend. And I personally want to thank all of our members of the channel and all of our Patreons. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in direct consulting, Patreon is the way to do it. If you got a project, you need to speak to me personally. It's Captain Joe here, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan working super hard behind the scenes as my amazing cameraman. And we will catch you in part 2 of our outboard motor cowl repair.